Dubai built winter inside the desert, placed an ocean inside a shopping mall, and raised a vertical city above the burning sand. But every single one of these spectacular wonders shares the exact same terrifying weakness. The artificial snow needs continuous mechanical cooling. The thousands of sharks need massive industrial pumps to breathe. The luxury glass towers need endless rivers of cold water flowing through their veins just to remain habitable. And the massive machines keeping all of them alive cannot simply stop when the economy slows down. Today we are ranking 7 iconic Dubai wonders by exactly what happens when their underlying life support systems are switched off. We are looking far beyond the glossy tourism brochures to uncover the hidden financial and environmental obligations of the city. The greatest vulnerability facing Dubai today is not a sudden dramatic collapse. It is the slow and relentless pressure of thousands of systems becoming more demanding and more expensive at the exact same time. Number 1 on our list is something most tourists will never photograph, yet it is the single most critical vulnerability in the entire region. Did this city completely conquer the harsh environment around it, or did it merely sign a permanent lease with a machine that it can never afford to turn off? The first wonders on this list have the luxury of time. They can be paused or shut down seasonally without destroying the city around them. But as we move further down the list, the consequences expand from a single isolated tourist attraction to an entire citywide disaster. And the very first warning sign came from a colossal landmark that was originally designed to do only one thing, which was to keep moving. The skyline of this city is defined by structures that constantly demand attention. Ain Dubai was built to be the ultimate observation wheel, towering over the coastline and promising unmatched views of the artificial islands below. But in 2022, shortly after its spectacular opening, the largest wheel on the planet simply stopped turning. It has remained completely dormant ever since. Officially, it entered a period of enhancement and maintenance. Unofficially, it has become a colossal, dead steel structure haunting the horizon. This introduces the very first layer of the tourism pressure facing the city. An observation wheel that does not move presents a profound visual and economic contradiction. The massive structure still dominates the skyline, it still requires heavy security, and the marine environment relentlessly attacks the metal, but it ceases to perform its primary economic function. When a massive piece of engineering sits paralyzed year after year, it stands as the ultimate proof that relentless maintenance costs can rapidly defeat projected tourism revenue. Building the structure was merely the down payment. The true cost is the endless obligation to operate, inspect, and protect it against the coastal humidity and desert winds. A static monument fails to generate the capital required to justify its own existence, sitting as a silent reminder of the immense financial gravity involved in building the biggest version of everything. Yet, according to our ranking rule, the city still had one absolute luxury here. It had the luxury of time. The wheel could afford to stop without plunging the rest of the city into darkness. It is an isolated failure. But the next wonder on our list does not have the privilege of simply shutting down and waiting indefinitely for repairs. It actively vanishes before the harshest part of the year even begins. Deep in the desert landscape, Dubai Miracle Garden advertises a vibrant explosion of more than 150 million blooming flowers. It is a staggering visual contradiction. You have massive passenger jets, entirely covered in fresh petals, and endless romantic pathways bursting with color, all thriving in an environment that naturally supports almost no vegetation. But the real miracle is not that the flowers grow in the sand. The secret is that this massive attraction operates with a strict expiry date. It does not even attempt to fight the brutal summer heat. When the temperatures begin their inevitable climb, the garden closes its doors to the public. The tourism machinery adapts to the climate by simply retreating from it. This seasonal shutdown exposes a massive vulnerability in the broader economic model of the region. The tourism sector experiences dramatic fluctuations because the outdoor environment becomes fundamentally hostile for nearly half the year. Hotels, airlines, and retail sectors must generate overwhelming profits during the winter months to compensate for the massive drop in foot traffic during the summer. Maintaining this floral illusion requires a continuous, highly engineered supply of water, nutrients, and precise agricultural management. The city has to literally rebuild the landscape every single season. The brilliance of this attraction is not that it conquered the summer heat, but rather that the planners knew exactly when to surrender to it. It is a highly calculated performance, but this seasonal dependency creates immense pressure on the local economy. Every restaurant, taxi driver, and hospitality worker feels the impact when the outdoor attractions power down. Does the existence of this garden prove that nature is flourishing in the desert, or does it prove that nature is merely a temporary performance scheduled to end before the summer takes total control? The flowers can disappear and return next season without any catastrophic consequences, but the next attraction on our list has to manufacture its own winter season every single hour of the day. Imagine walking directly out of a blistering desert summer and stepping immediately into a freezing alpine environment. Ski Dubai is a staggering feat of thermal engineering, maintaining a constant temperature of -4 degrees Celsius while the outside air boils. It is the ultimate visual equation of wealth and technology overpowering geography. But the physics of this environment reveal a terrifying operational burden. Thermodynamics dictates that heat will always relentlessly seek out cold spaces. Every single person who walks through the doors brings their own body heat. The brilliant lights generate heat. The mechanical lifts generate heat. Every time a door opens, the outside climate violently attempts to rush inside. The system cannot simply create snow once and rest. It must continuously, violently push the heat back out. It requires a network of industrial chillers, coolants, and massive compressors running without a single moment of hesitation. This is where the engineering success creates a permanent economic trap. Ski Dubai is not a failure of design. It is an extraordinary technical triumph. But that exact triumph creates a non-negotiable operating obligation. The city has effectively converted a natural season into a utility service. To keep the snow from turning into a massive puddle, the city must burn immense amounts of energy. And as global energy markets fluctuate, the cost of manufacturing this artificial winter constantly shifts. The tourism pressure here is immense. If visitor numbers drop due to global economic tightening, the snow still requires the exact same amount of electricity to remain frozen. The cost of operations is entirely divorced from the revenue of the attraction. Winter has been put on a power switch. Is the city successfully defeating the desert climate, or is it merely renting a temporary winter from a massive refrigeration system? Snow can melt without feeling any biological pain, and an empty ski slope is merely a financial loss. But the next attraction is not filled with frozen water. It is filled with living creatures that cannot survive a power failure. Suspended in the middle of one of the busiest shopping malls on the planet is an ocean that never sleeps. The Dubai Aquarium holds 10 million liters of water and serves as a highly complex biological life support system for thousands of marine animals, including hundreds of sharks and rays. We have now elevated the stakes from a static wheel and melting snow to actual living organisms. The machinery required to sustain this environment is breathtaking. The water must be constantly circulated, perfectly oxygenated, and chemically balanced. Massive filtration systems work silently behind the walls to remove waste, while specialized marine biologists monitor the delicate ecological balance every single minute. Here, the economic contradiction of Dubai tourism becomes incredibly sharp. A retail store in the mall can adjust its operating hours. A fashion boutique can reduce its staff during a recession. Visitor numbers can dramatically rise and fall depending on the global aviation market and regional stability. But biological demand does absolutely not negotiate. The sharks do not consume less oxygen during an economic downturn. The massive water pumps cannot be turned down to save money on the electric bill. This creates a terrifying baseline of operational debt. The tourism pressure is not just about filling hotel rooms. It is about generating enough continuous capital to keep the artificial life support systems running. If the global economy falters and the tourists stop arriving, the cost of keeping this ocean alive remains exactly the same. The living ocean becomes an absolute liability that must be funded regardless of the economic weather outside. When an attraction contains hundreds of living animals entirely dependent on synthetic circulation, which mechanical pump would you dare to switch off first? The wheel could safely stop. The garden could peacefully close. The artificial snow could simply melt into a drain. But this biological system has no equivalent escape route. And yet, this tank only contains 10 million liters. The next wonder on our list functions more like an entire vertical city standing on a single foundation, completely dependent on the exact same flow of resources. The most impressive part of the Burj Khalifa is not the glittering spire that pierces the clouds. The most impressive part of the tallest building in the world is the invisible river of freezing water moving rapidly through its dark internal arteries. When you build an 828-meter glass tower in a desert, you are essentially building a vertical greenhouse. The solar radiation hitting the glass is punishing. The thousands of people living, working, and visiting the tower generate an immense thermal load. To prevent the interior from becoming completely unlivable, the building relies on a massive, highly complex, chilled water cooling system. The tower demands so much intense cooling that the interaction between the cold pipes and the humid desert air creates a literal river of condensation. The system produces vast amounts of condensed water every day, which is then brilliantly recovered to irrigate the surrounding parkland. This sounds like an environmental victory, but it reveals a much darker dependency. Smart engineering does not make the massive building independent of the system. It makes the system completely indispensable. The Burj Khalifa is a vertical city containing hotels, corporate offices, luxury residences, and massive tourism decks. If the cooling infrastructure fails, the building does not just become uncomfortable, it becomes fundamentally uninhabitable. The stakes have escalated to human survival and total economic paralysis. The real estate market in Dubai heavily relies on the prestige of these megastructures to maintain high property values. But as these structures age, the mechanical maintenance debt multiplies. The pumps, the elevators, the fire suppression networks, and the cooling grids require relentless capital investment. The tourism and real estate sectors must continuously attract foreign wealth just to pay the maintenance bill of the skyline. Did the Burj Khalifa permanently defeat the extreme climate? Or does the extreme climate have to be defeated again every single hour to keep the glass city from baking its inhabitants? The tower changed the skyline vertically, but the next project permanently altered the geography of the planet. Looking down from a satellite, Palm Jumeirah appears as a perfect geometric pattern stamped directly into the ocean. It is a staggering achievement of marine engineering that added miles of highly lucrative artificial coastline to a city that desperately needed more beachfront property. But building an island out of dredged sand is very different from building a tower out of steel. Ski Dubai created an artificial environment contained safely inside a box. Palm Jumeirah fundamentally changed the box itself. The artificial fronds of the palm alter the natural flow of ocean currents. The breakwater that protects the luxurious mansions from the open sea also restricts the natural flushing of the water within the island. Sand is not static. The ocean is constantly attempting to reclaim the material, requiring ongoing coastal monitoring, dredging, and environmental management. We are no longer talking about a machine that can be easily repaired. We are talking about a permanent geographic alteration that requires permanent ecological supervision. This is where the real estate pressure meets environmental reality. The city sold the dream of ultimate luxury living on the water, but maintaining that promise requires massive ongoing investment. The water quality must be preserved, the beaches must be replenished, and the infrastructure connecting the island to the mainland must handle the weight of thousands of residents and tourists. This is not evidence that the island is currently sinking into the ocean. The true burden is much more mundane and much more expensive. It is the endless obligation to govern and manage an artificial marine structure for the rest of its existence. The initial billions spent to dredge the sand were just the beginning. The ongoing cost is the invisible tax of fighting the ocean forever. Is Palm Jumeirah a brilliant real estate development sitting peacefully in the sea, or is it a high-maintenance marine infrastructure project with very fragile real estate sitting precariously on top? And yet, the magnificent island, the towering skyscraper, the living aquarium, and the frozen ski slope do not operate alone. They are all desperately plugged into the exact same central vein. These massive structures are not 7 independent miracles of engineering. They are simply 7 incredibly demanding customers of the exact same invisible machine. The most important mega project in this entire region is not the one tourists photograph for their social media. It is the immense, unseen network of electricity generation, water desalination, chilled cooling grids, substations, and endless pipelines connecting everything together. The invisible machine is what truly keeps the desert at bay. Dubai has almost no natural fresh water. Every drop of water in the luxury hotel showers, every gallon in the massive aquarium, and every cup of coffee served in the cafes must be artificially manufactured by boiling or filtering seawater at an enormous energetic cost. The peak electrical demand of the city continues to break alarming new records every single year, as more residents arrive and more structures are plugged into the grid. The desalination plants and power stations must burn vast amounts of resources to keep the city functioning. The data reveals a terrifying truth about the tourism and economic expansion. Rising demand for power and water proves 2 contradictory things at exactly the same time. It proves that the city is successfully growing, but it also proves that the brutal machine required to support that growth must expand with it. Every new hotel, every new shopping mall, and every new artificial beach adds a permanent new weight to the grid. The city is trapped in a paradox where it must build more attractions to bring in the capital required to pay for the infrastructure, but the new attractions require even more infrastructure to survive. The machine requires an army of engineers, an endless supply of spare parts, and continuous, massive financial investment. If this invisible system stops, the wheel does not just stop turning, and the snow does not just melt. The entire metropolitan organism suffocates. The fundamental question hanging over the skyline is not whether the engineers can build another spectacular tower. They absolutely can. The question is, how many new architectural wonders can a completely artificial city add before maintaining the old ones becomes its absolute largest and most expensive project? This is where the entire system faces the ultimate domino test. Dubai does not need every single system to fail simultaneously to experience a profound crisis. Several of these immense bills only need to rise at the exact same time. Imagine the chain reaction. One significantly hotter summer requires substantially more chilled water cooling across the entire city. More cooling instantly means a massive spike in electrical demand. A sudden influx of new residents means more demand for artificially desalinated water. More towers require more industrial pumps to push that water into the sky. More artificial islands require more dredging and environmental management. All of these systems are entirely intolerant of waiting. The floral garden can peacefully close for the season. The giant observation wheel can quietly stop spinning. But the living aquarium cannot pause. The luxury residential homes cannot lose power. The massive hospitals absolutely cannot lose cooling. Now add another luxury hotel to the grid. Add another sprawling artificial island. Add another record-breaking tourist attraction. Each individual project looks completely independent and financially successful on the surface. But underneath the glittering facade, they all join the exact same invisible machine. The sheer density of these interconnected requirements creates a highly sensitive economic web. If global tourism faces a sudden downturn due to regional instability or a worldwide recession, the revenue flowing into the city slows down. But the massive operational cost of the machine does not care about the global economy. The machine demands to be fed. Dubai does not need a catastrophic natural disaster to face a crisis. It merely needs the cost of keeping the impossible alive to outpace the revenue it generates. However, there is one major problem with the argument we have just built, and we must address it to see the complete picture. The problem is that the city is not currently failing. Dubai has massive reserves of capital. It has access to some of the most brilliant engineering minds on the planet. The local economy is highly diversified, with official data showing that the vast majority of its gross domestic product now comes from non-oil activities. The authorities have repeatedly expanded, repaired, and replaced massive infrastructure systems that other global cities might never even attempt to build. The power authorities continue to successfully expand their generation capacity to meet the terrifying surge in demand. But overwhelming financial success does not magically eliminate systemic dependency. In fact, extreme success gives the city the dangerous confidence to build even more of it. I do not believe these massive projects prove that the developers are foolish. Many of them prove exactly the opposite. They are monuments to human ambition. But brilliant engineering does not erase an operational bill. It simply makes that bill manageable, assuming the supporting economic system keeps growing forever. The vulnerability is not structural. It is financial and environmental. The machine works perfectly, but the cost of running it is becoming astronomical. The greatest threat facing this magnificent city may not be a single glass tower falling or an artificial island sinking into the sea. The true danger is something far less cinematic and far more insidious. It is the mundane reality of electricity, desalinated water, mechanical cooling, and structural maintenance becoming relentlessly more demanding across thousands of different mega-projects at the exact same time. We have seen the frozen snow inside the blistering desert. We have seen the captive sharks swimming above the retail stores. We have seen the vertical city pulling water from the humid air. And we have seen the massive invisible grid of pipes and pumps required to sustain the illusion. The leaders of Dubai successfully built the absolute impossible. They conquered the hostile geography and engineered a global metropolis out of the sand. But building the impossible was only the first chapter of the story. Now, they are burdened with the infinite task of keeping the impossible alive. Is this city proving to the world that human technology can brilliantly overcome any environmental limit, or are they simply building a fragile ecosystem that can never, ever afford to stop growing? If you value investigative documentaries that look beyond the skyline to uncover the hidden mechanisms of the world, make sure to subscribe. The next major warning sign is rarely hidden where the tourism brochure tells you to look. This documentary is an independent analytical review based on public data, economic trends, and engineering principles available at the time of research. Global tourism, economic conditions, and geopolitical realities are subject to rapid change. This content analyzes urban systems and development models and does not constitute financial, investment, or personal travel advice. Some conclusions presented are logical inferences drawn from systemic operational dependencies. This analysis does not target or intend to disparage any residents, specific companies, or demographics within the region.